I got the job of director here in 1995, so that's the first time I'd come across the Richard Attenborough Centre, and to be honest, I really thought that Richard Attenborough would just be a bit of a name on a letterhead, and that would be that, and I'd never see him. And I was completely amazed that within a couple of weeks of arriving here, I got an invitation to go to his house for lunch. So that's the first sort of interaction that I ever had with Richard, and it sort of started from there, really. I thought, well, maybe that's it. You know, I've had a really nice lunch. He was so generous. I spent time with he and his wife, and we talked about this place and what his aspirations had been and why he got involved with it in the first place. And I thought, again, well, you know, that was really lovely, and maybe that will be that. And a few weeks later, we had a board meeting, and Richard arrived at the board meeting as a fully supportive member of the board, not just as a figurehead. So that's how we started to build a real friendship, actually, as well as a working relationship. And my first board meeting, he sat next to me, and I was clearly quite nervous. This is it's a brand new job, a big job for me. The Vice Chancellor was at the board meeting, and I've got Lord Attenborough sitting next to me, and I'm now presenting lots of paperwork. And after a few minutes, I felt somebody just moving towards me, and Richard held my hand for the majority of the meeting. And I think there was one really difficult bit, and he turned over and whispered in my ear, "I'm so proud of you, darling." So he really did his best to sort of bridge that gap between the Lord Attenborough, the director, the actor, and Richard, the supportive, really helpful working man. For me, I was probably of the generation where Miracle on 34th Street was the film that I'd seen, and The Railway Children. And then it occurred to me that actually when I think I was 14 or 15, I saw Cry Freedom at my local cinema, and I grew up in quite a small town. And it was the first political film or piece of cinema that I'd ever seen, and it made such an impact on me, and probably not realising at the time that Richard had directed it, and not realising that until much later. But I remember arriving at the cinema, and there were protesters outside, and just wondering what on earth this whole thing was about, and going in, and Cry Freedom's not a short film. It's a long film, but it absolutely enthralling me. When Richard first became interested in the centre and the work that Ellen Hartley was doing to get this place built, and he really spearheaded the fundraising campaign, because he'd got this absolute passion around making the arts accessible to all, especially those with a disability. And he talked very much in the early days of disabled people being second-class citizens, and he wanted this place to be a place where disabled people were our first-class citizens. When I came and started working here in 2005, we talked about how attitudes to disability have really moved on. And what I was really impressed with is that he was really open to a new way of thinking around access. And we talked very much about making this place inclusive rather than an exclusive place for disabled people. This needed to be an inclusive place where everybody could come and work on the same basis, and access not being about ramps and lifts anymore, but it being about philosophy and ethos. Richard would make sure that he invited me to a meeting to discuss how things were going really frequently. So often I'd go down to London and meet him, and his first question would be, "So what can I do for you? What can we do?" And it was at the time the City of Leicester were talking to him about bringing the Picasso ceramics. He was gifting his collection to Newark Museum. And we were talking lots about that. And actually, as I was there, they were packaging up the ceramics. So there were these beautiful Picasso ceramics all over the floor, and we were sort of tiptoeing round them. Um, and Richard was trying to think of how the centre could benefit from that, and I was sort of thinking, well, you know, it's Newark Museum's gig. It's their it's their project. So, you know, how could he do that, and you know, how could we benefit? And so he concocted this amazing thing where instead of the preview just happening at New Walk, we had a preview event. So I was then asked to invite as many people as we might want to go to New Walk, to meet Richard, to meet the curators, and to go around the exhibition before even the preview had happened, and which is just such a lovely thing, and you know, the generosity of his time in doing that, and you know, he sat for several hours signing catalogues and talking to everybody, and really, you know, really engaging with everybody. And we used that event to thank people that had been involved in the Richard Attenborough Centre, but we also used it as you know, ways to strengthen partnerships. But I suppose the most interesting bit of the end of that story is that after the event, Richard, I was saying to Richard what a beautiful collection it is, and you know, and it was obviously dear to his heart, and he said, I think one would look really lovely in the Richard Attenborough Centre, and I was, really, could we have one? And he said, yes, darling, you can choose one. And I said, no, you must have a piece in mind, and he said, no, just come back and choose one. And I think it's the best shopping trip I've ever been on. He arranged for Princess Diana to open the centre in 1997, and I think their connection came across because he had helped her with voice coaching and presentation skills. So he has connections to the royal family. He had a signed picture of Mother Teresa on the side as I went in. He knew all the footballers, so it wasn't even just, you know, he knew the acting network. He was really well connected, and I think it showed his work beyond his acting and directing, that actually he was a doer. You know, he made change. He helped in getting this place built because he wanted to make a difference, and I think that's what sets him apart. Actually, it's not, you know, he's not just the man behind the camera or the person on the stage. He you know, he was a whole person.